Hello everyone. I'm Lauren, and my thesis was called Sometimes You Have to Work Hard Despite the System, exploring the roles and experiences of designated teachers for looked after children. First, I'll give a little bit of background and context to looked after children and designated teachers. So looked after children, they're a particularly vulnerable group in society. In the UK at the moment, there are about 80,000 looked after children who most commonly have entered care because of neglect or abuse. And these experiences put these children at a much greater risk than their peers, and academically and emotionally and in terms of their future life outcomes, they consistently show much poorer outcomes. In terms of the statutory context, when a child becomes looked after, the local authority becomes their corporate parent, and they have a legal and moral obligation to safeguard and promote the outcomes and the education of these children. So in 2017 as well, this extended to all previously looked after children, which could be children who've been in care for some time, but then have come under care of the adoption order or a special guardianship order or a child arrangements order. So over the past 20 years, the government have put in place a few different initiatives to try and promote the education of these children. One of the initiatives was the virtual school, which is a service in the local authority that collaborate with schools and they monitor the attendance and the attainment of looked after children. And another key initiative was the establishment of designated teachers, and they are placed within schools and they must oversee the education and well-being of looked after children and previously looked after children in their school settings. So this includes being an advocate for looked after children. It includes liaising with virtual schools, social workers, parents and carers, and it includes just really promoting the social and emotional and learning outcomes of these children. So why designated teachers? So despite holding this very crucial responsibility for promoting outcomes for looked after children, there's very little research exploring how these professionals experience their role, enact their role, and perceive their role. There's also only one designated teacher generally in every school, so it can be quite an isolating role. And I was really curious to understand more about how these professionals really understand and perceive their experiences. So my research questions, ultimately the aim of my research was to understand and explore the designated teacher role in England. I structured the thesis around these questions. First, how these statutory regulations related to designated teacher practice. Second, it was about the barriers and facilitating factors that impact how designated teachers experience and enact their role. And here I wanted to look at key challenges as well as things that might mitigate those challenges, and also designated teachers' sense of personal effectiveness. And finally, I hope to explore factors around how designated teachers worked with other professionals, and this included social workers, virtual schools, and educational psychologists. So what did I do? In terms of the design and methodology, I took a critical realist stance, and I used a mixed method design. So I used online surveys and semi-structured telephone interviews with designated teachers. My participants included a sample of virtual schools who completed a survey, and also a sample of designated teachers. And I got 44 responses from virtual schools across the country out of about 150 virtual schools. And those virtual schools distributed the information to their designated teachers. And I got 142 survey responses from designated teachers. And from those, I also followed up with some 16 telephone interviews. I analysed the data, the quantitative data using statistical analysis to look for trends and patterns. And then my interviews, I analysed using thematic analysis. Okay, so what did I find? I'm going to outline very briefly some of my key survey findings. So first of all, designated teachers, all designated teachers who I surveyed held additional roles. Most commonly, this was a head teacher, a designated safeguarding lead, or a SENCO. Sometimes it was all of those roles, sometimes it was those roles and more. The majority of designated teachers held leadership positions, which I found quite interesting. However, only half reported that they received any initial training about the role, which was also very interesting. The majority of designated teachers expressed that they were generally able to spend about 1 day dedicated to this part of their role. And finally, around 2/3 said that they had worked with an EP before within their designated teacher role, but most of them did express they thought that our role would be relevant to their work. However, a lot of them said that they probably would only involve us if the looked after child had learning needs. So there was less understanding or perhaps awareness about our role with social, emotional, mental health. In terms of my interview findings, I used interviews to triangulate and complement and really dig deeper into some of the questionnaire findings. So I had 3 key themes. The first one really explored complexities around the role of the designated teacher. And this was thinking quite deeply about the challenges faced by designated teachers, some of the highlights of the role, and also just general experiences of being a designated teacher. The second looked more at the relationships and the connections that designated teachers had with other stakeholders in their role, and they placed a great deal of importance on this. So this included working with staff, working with virtual schools, parents and carers and young people, and then wider professionals like EPs, social workers and mental health professionals. And the final theme looked more systemically, and it was about the challenges in the wider system. So most prominently, this was about a lack of standardization between different counties in the country. It was difficulties with joined up working and also really overly bureaucratic process and procedure. So my key findings, I summarized all my results to identify some of these, and I'll just briefly explain what the key challenges were and what helped. So first, time and workload. Designated teachers often described their role as time intensive. The role was often a bolt-on or an add-on to one of their additional duties, and the time needed for the role depended on quite a different number of factors. It included the size of the school, the type of setting, the number of looked after children in the school, the experience of the designated teacher, and all the additional roles held by the designated teacher. Role awareness, status, and recognition was another massive challenge faced by these professionals. Although most designated teachers in the study did hold a leadership position, they also expressed concerns that the level of status or recognition of designated teachers in the school was not high at all. Participants highlighted there was a general lack of awareness about the designated teacher role, and school staff and senior leaders didn't always understand the role's function or the role's importance. Many designated teachers felt the role lacked influence to enact change effectively. Staff understanding about the needs of looked after children was another big challenge. So although many staff were very supportive advocates for looked after children, designated teachers reported quite a lot of variation in how understanding staff were about the needs of these children. And then bureaucracy and administration were regularly cited as a challenge. So designated teachers explained that looked after children often move within and between counties, depending on their placement stability. And one of the issues was that there's no standardization or consistency in the paperwork for these different counties, which made their role really, really difficult. And this lack of consistency also corresponded to role expectations. So depending on which local authority they were working with, there were different expectations about their role and also other professionals, which made it really difficult to know who was meant to be doing what. And finally, multi-agency working. So building relationships and establishing links with key agencies was essential for designated teachers to undertake their role. However, overstretched and under-resourced mental health services and social care services made this very, very difficult. So what helped? Basically correlating to what the key challenges were. So essentially more time to meet the duties, greater recognition about what designated teachers did and the importance of their role within schools, but also more widely. Training was another mitigating factor, as well as networking opportunities where designated teachers could meet with others, strengthen their understanding of the role and their role identity. And also more clarity between other services and more consistency, which could be supported by things like joint training with social workers and virtual schools. In terms of the sense of effectiveness, it was really encouraging to hear that most designated teachers reported feeling either effective or very effective in their role. And when I explored the factors that impacted effectiveness, they correlated to competency, autonomy, and connection, which links in with Ryan and Dickey's self-determination theory, which was fascinating. So when designated teachers felt that they had the knowledge and skills, that they had the authority and the freedom to make decisions, and when they had the relationships and connections with other stakeholders, they felt more effective. And my very last slide, because I'm being told that this is now the end, are implications. So I'll quickly go to the EP ones, and the broad ones I'm just going to just skip over. Basically, raising the profile of designated teachers, we can play a role in that by asking our schools, who is the designated teacher and how can I help them? It's about asking about looked after children, it's asking about their previously looked after children, and it's by offering joint training with designated teachers or even attending children's personal education plan meetings. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much for listening.